We are getting some breaking news in the investigation into the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie.
At 1:47 in the morning on February 1st, 2026, a camera mounted outside a quiet home in Tucson, Arizona went dark. Not because of a power failure, not because of a technical glitch. Someone turned it off deliberately. And then, for the next 41 minutes, whoever was inside that house took their time. That number, 41 minutes, is the detail that has stayed with investigators since the beginning, because it tells you something that no witness statement, no security footage, and no ransom note can tell you. It tells you this person was not afraid. They moved through Nancy Guthrie's home as though they had been there before, as though they knew exactly where everything was, exactly what to disable, and exactly how long they had before anyone would notice. At 2:28 in the morning, a second signal disappeared. This one was not coming from a camera on a wall. It was coming from inside Nancy Guthrie's body. Her pacemaker, the device that had been quietly monitoring her heart, sending small transmissions every few minutes to a connected phone, lost its connection. Her heart was still beating, but she was no longer there. That is where this investigation begins. Not with a phone call, not with a ransom note, with a gap. 41 minutes of silence between a camera going dark and a woman disappearing from her own home. And investigators have been working inside that gap ever since. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old and had lived in Tucson for more than 5 decades. By every account, she was a woman of deep routine. Family dinners on specific nights, church services streamed from home when she could not attend in person, daily medication she could not afford to miss. The kind of life that runs on a quiet, reliable schedule. The kind of life that, unfortunately, is also easy to observe from the outside. On the night of January 31st, 2026, she followed that routine exactly. She had dinner at the home of her daughter, Annie. Her son-in-law, Tommaso Cion, drove her back to her own home afterward. At 9:50 in the evening, she stepped through her front door. The door closed behind her. And according to investigators, that was the last confirmed moment that anyone saw Nancy Guthrie alive. The following morning, her family noticed something small but wrong. She had missed church. For a woman like Nancy, that absence was not normal. Calls went unanswered. Family members drove to the house and let themselves in. What they found inside was the kind of scene that stops people cold. Her phone was sitting where she left it. Her medication had not been touched. Her personal belongings were exactly where they should be. But Nancy was gone. And outside the home, on the ground near the edge of the property, there were drops of blood. Within hours, Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos confirmed that this was not a missing person case. This was a kidnapping. Sheriff Nanos has been the public face of this investigation from the beginning, and the way he has spoken about it has been deliberate and measured, in a way that serious investigators tend to be when they know more than they are saying. He has not speculated. He has not used language loosely. And on the question of evidence, he has been specific in one area that matters enormously: the digital trail. Sheriff Nanos confirmed publicly that cell tower data is already, in his words, flagging things. That phrase is not casual. In investigative language, when cell tower data flags something, it means a device appeared in a location or at a time that does not belong. It means a signal behaved in a way that breaks the pattern of that neighborhood, that street, that block. It means someone was there who should not have been, and their phone recorded it whether they knew it or not. That confirmation changed the public understanding of this case, because it meant that even though whoever took Nancy Guthrie came prepared, wearing gloves, wearing a mask, disabling the camera, taking her phone, leaving almost nothing visible behind, they may have left something they could not control: a digital signal, a trace that exists not on any surface in that house, but inside the infrastructure of the city itself. Here is the part that most people do not fully understand about how phones work in 2026. Even when a phone is not being actively used, It does not go quiet. It is constantly scanning for nearby Wi-Fi networks, registering with cell towers, updating background applications, logging location data silently, and without any action from the person carrying it. Every house on a residential street, every router within range, potentially recorded any device that passed through the area, even a device that never connected, never slowed down, never stopped. Investigators working serious crimes have used exactly this kind of data before. In the Brian Kohberger case, the investigation into the murders of 4 University of Idaho students in November of 2022, prosecutors did not build their case around what his phone did on the night of the crime. They built it around what his phone did in the weeks before. Repeated passes near the property, late-night movements, patterns that did not belong to someone with no connection to that address. The phone became the record of a person who was planning something. In Tucson, investigators are reportedly doing the same thing. They are not only looking at the night of February 1st, they are looking at every night before it. Because if the person who took Nancy Guthrie spent any time watching her home, and the level of preparation suggests strongly that they did, then somewhere inside the cell tower data and the Wi-Fi logs of that neighborhood, there is a device that does not belong. A device that appeared more than once. A device attached to a person. And according to Sheriff Nanos, that data is already telling investigators something. The question that no one has answered yet is this. If the digital trail is already flagging a pattern, why has no arrest been made? What is standing between the investigators and the person who walked into Nancy Guthrie's home at 1:47 in the morning? The answer to that question lives inside one of the most unusual pieces of evidence in this entire case, and it is not something found on a hard drive or pulled from a cell tower. It was found inside Nancy Guthrie herself. When investigators talk about evidence in a kidnapping case, they usually mean physical things. Fingerprints, fibers, blood, footage. Things you can photograph, bag, and bring into a laboratory. But in the Nancy Guthrie case, one of the most significant pieces of evidence is something that has never appeared in a courtroom before in quite this way. It is a continuous stream of biological data transmitted wirelessly from a device the size of a small matchbox implanted in an 84-year-old woman's chest. Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker did not stop working when she was taken. It kept going. And in the hours after her abduction, it kept doing what it was designed to do. It sent signals, small, quiet transmissions every few minutes, reaching out to the phone it had been paired with, attempting to report her heart's condition to a monitoring system that was no longer within range. Those signals are what gave investigators something rare in a case like this. In the early days after her disappearance, they had something close to proof of life. Sheriff Chris Nanos said it directly and on the record in those first days. Nancy Guthrie was alive. That statement did not come from hope or from family reassurance. It came from data. The pacemaker was still transmitting. Somewhere out there, her heart was still beating. Modern pacemakers are not simple mechanical devices. They are sophisticated monitoring systems that communicate continuously. Every few minutes, Nancy's pacemaker would have been attempting to connect to her paired phone, sending what medical professionals call telemetry data. Information about her heart rate, her rhythm, any irregularities, any moments of elevated stress or unusual activity. Under normal circumstances, that data flows quietly to a monitoring center where medical staff can track a patient's condition remotely. Under the circumstances of February 1st, 2026, that data was flowing into an investigation. And what it reportedly recorded was not the pattern of someone resting. It was not the steady, slow rhythm of a person sleeping in an unfamiliar place. According to reporting on the case, the pacemaker data reflected elevated heart activity, sustained stress, the biological signature of someone who was afraid and being moved. That distinction matters enormously because it shifts the timeline. It suggests that whatever happened to Nancy Guthrie did not end inside her home on Tucson. It continued. It extended beyond that 2:28 in the morning disconnect. Something was happening to her after she was taken, and her own body was recording it. The challenge for investigators was that knowing she was alive and knowing where she was are two entirely different problems. The Bluetooth signal her pacemaker emits was never engineered for long-distance tracking. Under standard conditions, it reaches somewhere between 15 and 30 feet. It is designed for a bedside monitor, not a search grid. But investigators and medical technology experts reportedly believed that with the right equipment, that range could be extended enough to be useful. What followed was one of the more extraordinary search efforts in recent American missing persons history. Law enforcement deployed helicopters over the desert terrain surrounding Tucson, flying low and slow in systematic patterns. They were not scanning visually, they were scanning electronically, using what experts describe as signal sniffers. Amplified receivers fitted with directional antennas capable of filtering through thousands of overlapping wireless signals to isolate a single, specific transmission. In this case, one transmission. The unique Bluetooth identifier assigned to Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker. Picture that for a moment. A helicopter moving slowly over the Sonoran desert at low altitude. Equipment aboard searching through an invisible landscape of radio signals, Wi-Fi pings, Bluetooth transmissions from cars and homes and passing phones, trying to find one specific frequency that would confirm a woman's location. The environment worked against them at every level. Desert terrain creates interference. Hills and structures block and scatter signals. Power lines generate noise. The movement of the helicopter itself created distortion that complicated the readings, and the signal they were hunting was already weak under ideal conditions. Experts who followed the case publicly noted that drones, flying lower, moving slower, capable of hovering, would potentially give investigators better proximity and precision. But even then, there was a darker possibility that no one wanted to name directly. The signal might be active but physically unreachable, coming from somewhere enclosed, underground, or shielded by structure. Or it might have stopped entirely. That second possibility is the one that changed the emotional temperature of this investigation around its third and fourth week. Because the pacemaker data, for all its value, has a limitation that no technology can overcome. It requires proximity. If Nancy was moved far enough from any receiver or placed somewhere the signal could not escape, the transmission would become effectively invisible. And if something happened to Nancy herself, the signal would stop for a different reason entirely. Investigators have been careful with their public language around this question, and that carefulness is itself informative. Sheriff Nanos has not confirmed proof of life beyond those early statements. He has not updated the public on the status of the pacemaker signal. What he has said, as recently as the case's second month, is that the investigation is moving, that they are closer. That word, closer, is the kind of language law enforcement uses when something has changed behind the scenes that they are not yet prepared to disclose. While the aerial search was underway and the pacemaker data was being analyzed, a second category of evidence was developing in a completely different direction. Inside Nancy Guthrie's home, forensic teams had collected DNA. Not hers, not belonging to any family member who had been inside the house. Foreign DNA. From someone who had no business being there. Under normal circumstances, foreign DNA at a crime scene is a turning point. You run it against the national database, you get a match, you have a name. But in this case, the DNA did not match anyone in the system. No criminal record, no prior entry, no existing profile, which leaves investigators working with what forensic scientists describe as one of the most painstaking processes in modern crime analysis. They may be dealing with a mixed sample, DNA from multiple contributors layered on a single surface, which means the suspect's genetic profile may be embedded within other profiles, and separating it requires a level of laboratory precision that takes significant time. Forensic experts who have worked cases of this type describe the process as isolating one voice in a room full of people talking at once. The information is there, the signal exists, but extracting it cleanly enough to be usable in court requires patience and technology working together. And once that profile is isolated, it can be run through genealogical databases, the same databases that have been used to solve cold cases that sat untouched for 30 and 40 years, tracing family connections backward until they arrive at a living person. And then, in the middle of all of this careful, methodical investigative work, the noise started. Messages began arriving, not to the FBI, not to the Pima County Sheriff's Office, to the media. And whoever was sending them was not being quiet about it. The messages claimed knowledge of Nancy's location. They claimed to know who had taken her. They demanded payment. The first demand was reportedly in the millions. Then it dropped. Then it dropped again, eventually landing at half a Bitcoin, tens of thousands of dollars at current value. That pattern alone raised serious concerns among investigators and former law enforcement professionals who reviewed the communications publicly. Real ransom demands do not decrease over time. They do not become less urgent as days pass. The direction of these demands was moving the wrong way. But what made the situation genuinely complicated was the persistence. Whoever was sending these messages did not stop when they were ignored. They did not disappear when their credibility was questioned. They kept going, week after week, contacting the same outlets repeatedly. And within those messages, there were contradictions that could not be reconciled. In one message, Nancy Guthrie was dead. In another message, sent the same day by the same source, they claimed to have seen her alive in Sonora, Mexico. Both statements cannot be true. And that contradiction forced investigators into a position they know well, sorting through noise to find the signal, if there is one. Because here is what made dismissing the messages entirely difficult. One detail kept appearing: Sonora, the Mexican state that borders Arizona directly south of Tucson, less than 2 hours by road. That detail had not originated with the media messages. It had appeared in earlier private communications, the ones sent directly to the Guthrie family in the days immediately after the disappearance. The ones that Savannah Guthrie, Nancy's daughter and NBC News anchor, reportedly described as feeling real. Those early messages contained details that had not been made public. Details that, in investigations like this, only a small number of people would have access to. That is the thread that Part 3 has to follow. Because there are now two distinct categories of communication in this case: early, private, specific, and credible, and later, public, contradictory, and persistent. And the question of whether those two categories come from the same person or from two entirely different sources may be the most important unanswered question in this entire investigation. By the time this investigation entered its second month, it had developed a shape that experienced investigators recognize. Not chaos, not a dead end, a pressure system. Multiple streams of evidence moving separately, each one incomplete on its own, but each one tightening the space available to whoever is responsible. Cell tower data flagging anomalies, DNA waiting on laboratory analysis, pacemaker telemetry establishing a biological timeline, video footage still being reviewed, and underneath all of it, a geographic thread pointing consistently in one direction: south. The Sonora connection is not speculation invented by message senders looking for attention. It appeared in the earliest communications sent to the Guthrie family. Private messages that arrived within days of Nancy's disappearance, before the media coverage had fully developed, before the public knew the details that those messages contained. Savannah Guthrie, who is both Nancy's daughter and a professional journalist with NBC News, has spoken carefully about those early messages. She described them as feeling credible. That is a meaningful statement from someone who is both emotionally invested and professionally trained to evaluate information critically. The distance from Tucson to the Sonoran border is roughly 60 miles. Under normal driving conditions, that is less than an hour, which means that if someone had a plan, a vehicle, and a route already mapped before the night of February 1st, moving Nancy Guthrie across an international border before sunrise was not only possible, it was logistically straightforward. And once that border is crossed, the investigative terrain changes completely. Jurisdiction shifts. Access to locations and witnesses becomes significantly more complicated. Evidence that might be reachable inside the United States becomes difficult or impossible to obtain through standard channels. That jurisdictional reality is part of what makes this case so difficult, and part of what makes the preparation so significant. Because the level of planning involved in what happened at Nancy Guthrie's home on February 1st suggests strongly that whoever did this understood the geography. They understood the route. They understood what crossing that border would mean for anyone trying to find them. Think through what investigators have established about that night. The camera was disabled first. Not during the entry, not as an afterthought, but as the opening move. The suspect spent more than 40 minutes inside the home without rushing. They wore gloves. They wore a mask. They took Nancy without her phone, without her medication, without anything that could be used to track her through conventional means. They left almost no physical trace. The only biological evidence found at the scene, the foreign DNA, belonged to someone with no prior record in any national database. This is not the profile of an impulsive crime. This is the profile of someone who studied the situation over time, who knew Nancy's routine well enough to predict her movements, who knew the layout of her home well enough to go directly to the camera, and who had a plan for what came after. Investigators and criminal behavior analysts who have reviewed publicly available details of the case have noted consistently that crimes executed at this level of preparation almost never involve a stranger. The knowledge required, the routine, the camera location, the layout, the timing, points to someone with access, someone who had been inside that world, or close enough to it to observe it in detail. And that brings the investigation back to the one question that has sat at the center of this case since the beginning, largely unspoken, but never absent. Who, in Nancy Guthrie's life, had that kind of access? Investigators have not named anyone publicly. Sheriff Nanos has been precise about that. No suspect has been announced. No person of interest has been identified on the record. But the investigative work happening below the surface of those public statements is not standing still. The cell tower data that Sheriff Nanos confirmed is flagging anomalies covers not just the night of the abduction, but the weeks before it. If someone was conducting surveillance of Nancy's home, driving past it, parking near it, observing her routine, their phone was likely with them during those passes. And if that phone registered with any tower or router in that neighborhood more than once, more than twice, in a pattern that does not match a resident or a regular visitor, investigators now have a record of it. This is how the Kohberger investigation ultimately succeeded. Not from a single dramatic piece of evidence, but from a pattern that became undeniable. A phone that appeared near a property repeatedly, at late hours, over multiple weeks, belonging to someone with no obvious reason to be there. That pattern, combined with DNA evidence, built the foundation of a case that resulted in an arrest, and ultimately, a guilty plea. In Tucson, investigators are reportedly constructing the same kind of layered foundation, and according to Sheriff Nanos, they are closer than the public silence might suggest. The DNA evidence remains one of the most significant unresolved elements. Foreign genetic material found inside the home of a woman who lived alone, belonging to someone with no criminal record, is not a dead end. It is a starting point that requires time. Forensic genealogy, the process of building a family tree from a DNA sample and working backward through relatives to identify a contributor, has resolved cases that sat cold for decades. It has identified perpetrators from samples collected 30 and 40 years before the technology existed to use them. In the Nancy Guthrie case, that process is reportedly underway, and once it produces a usable profile, it will not simply point investigators toward a name. It will place that name inside a web of family connections, geographic history, and verifiable movement that either aligns with the evidence or contradicts it. The Ransom communications, despite their contradictions and their credibility problems, have not been entirely set aside. Former investigators who have reviewed the publicly available details of those messages have noted that the early private communications, the ones sent directly to the family, the ones containing details not yet public, carry a different character than the later media-facing messages. The early ones were specific, the later ones were contradictory. That divergence suggests the possibility of two separate sources, one connected to the crime and one attempting to insert themselves into a situation they have no direct knowledge of. Investigators understand this phenomenon well. High-profile cases attract individuals who, for reasons ranging from financial desperation to psychological need, attempt to present themselves as having information they do not possess. Separating those voices from a voice with genuine knowledge is painstaking work, but it is work that is done methodically. What we do not know in this case is still significant, and responsible reporting requires saying so directly. We do not know with certainty where Nancy Guthrie is. We do not know the current status of her pacemaker signal. We do not know whether the DNA sample has been successfully isolated and run through genealogical databases. We do not know whether the cell tower data has produced a specific device identifier that can be traced to an individual. We do not know the contents of the early Ransom communications in enough detail to evaluate their credibility independently. And we do not know, as of this recording, whether Nancy Guthrie is alive. What we do know is that this investigation is active, that multiple agencies are involved, that evidence is being processed across several disciplines simultaneously, that a $1 million reward remains available for information leading to Nancy's location or the identification of whoever is responsible, and that in cases built the way this one is being built, layer by layer, signal by signal, with pressure accumulating across multiple evidence streams at once, the resolution often comes not from a single dramatic breakthrough, but from the moment when one piece connects to another and the entire structure becomes visible.